Hello, movie monkeys, or should I say, for this movie. She can't see what I'm doing. I'm Ryan Ellis. This is Bev Ellis.
Hi.
We're going to talk about Out of Sight today on YouTube, obviously. We talked about A Star is Born last week, our first ever video, on camera at least. Went okay, I guess. And we'll talk about plenty of other topics. The first thing we're going to do, and this is what's going to be the standard now with corrections, it'll be the YouTube video. So if you want to find out what we messed up, we might acknowledge it in future episodes, but for that episode, in this case Out of Sight obviously, we'll do it in the YouTube video. And I'm remembering when I saw in the first video, I'm much more of a pointer than I ever thought I was. And a blinker.
I knew he was a pointer.
I didn't know I was such a pointer. So the first, well, actually, we have today is, Bev, you said the first Charlie Kaufman movie to get made was Human Nature. Not Human Behavior, as you said, it's Human Nature. But that was...
I'm an idiot on two counts.
I think his second movie. His first was The Great Being John Malkovich.
Consider me well actually'd.
There's a second one, this time on me. George Clooney would probably hate that I aged him. He was only 37 when the movie came out. He was not in his early 40s, as I said. And the third thing isn't so much a correction as it is a speculation. We wondered if Dennis Farina is playing a man actually named Marshall, because it says in the credits, Marshall, so Marshall Cisco, or if the credits just have his job title before his last name, because he is a marshal. But I looked it up. A federal marshal is spelled with one L, and in the credits on the IMDb, it's two L's. So maybe they're just having fun with us?
Maybe there's something about it in the book. Maybe it's like a touch from the novel.
That could be. He looks nothing like a marshal, though.
Neither does Jennifer Lopez.
Right. They don't acknowledge it, but I guess Jennifer Lopez's mother was Hispanic. I think it's a mixed-race marriage. So those were the corrections and the mistakes and whatnot for Out of Sight. We will actually lead ourselves 3 times. Really, more 2 corrections. The next thing to do is a very brief review of Glass Onion. So it's fairly timely. It came out, I think, just before Christmas. We both liked it. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
Oh, I loved it. I don't think this is a unique opinion. I think that Knives Out and now Glass Onion are really proving to all theater goers or viewers in general how much we're missing movies that are just fun and entertaining and colorful with like really campy scenery eating performances. I just want to live in this world all the time because it stands out so much against the films that are getting made, which are so dour all the time, with maybe the exception of Marvel, which is fine. Marvel's doing Marvel's thing, but this feels like something separate for the rest of us that can also be cheerful and just a real popcorn fun movie that's not stupid, never insults your intelligence.
Great showcase for Janelle Monáe as well.
Ooh, love her.
I don't know if I totally bought what her character is doing, or I won't say any more than that in case people haven't seen it yet. But I do think she did a good job. And everybody's pretty good. Norton has got a very big role. Edward Norton's been in plenty of Wes Anderson movies in recent history, and other than that, it's independent stuff or nothing. And here he's, I guess, the second lead behind Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig, who, of course, is just living his life in this role.
Mm-hmm. Having fun yet again.
Really going all the way with it and doing something that couldn't be more opposite of James Bond, possibly intentionally, but he's having a lot more fun in these movies than I think he was ever having in James Bond.
Or in anything he's done before, probably.
Maybe.
Yeah.
He's excellent.
So highly recommend Glass Onion. A Knives Out mystery is just because Netflix wanted to market it that way. He didn't want it to be that way, and it has nothing to do with Knives Out, except for the main character. That's something, of course. But there's no knives, I don't think, in this entire movie.
But you could say the same about Bond movies. They're just a complete series of movies with one main character that carries through, but each movie is its own independent story.
Moneypenny? An M,
okay, but
an R, and Q.
Hey, maybe we'll see Hugh Grant again. There's no reason that we won't see Hugh Grant and Ethan Hawke again. Mm-hmm. We might see those little side characters. Oh, no, we won't see Ethan Hawke, but we might see...
Hugh Grant makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
And Noah Segan has a great scene stealer in this. Not a big name, but he's been in all of Rian Johnson's films, and he's got a good running theme in this.
Yeah.
I call this the Out of Sight and Sound section of the review, the YouTube video this week. The Sight and Sound list came out in December. We are the obvious people to talk about a top 100 list or any kind of list because that's why we started doing this podcast, to review the AFI's top 100 lists in 98, and 2007. And we will talk about Sight and Sound at some point, pretty soon in fact, I think. I've been a madman about watching the movies I hadn't seen before, including movies like Pather Panchali, I think I'm saying that right, and L'Avventura, which I'd been putting off for years. They were in my Canopy wish list, and I finally watched both of them. But it looks like we're going to cover one of the highest ranking Sight and Sound movies in early February. So we will talk about the Sight and Sound list when we review that movie.
The little Valentine's theme.
Yeah, we're going to do the month of Strangelove. Maybe not so much strange this year like last year was. That became a theme that just fell into our laps in February, the Valentine's month. So we'll do it again. A bunch of love stories. Probably some of them, maybe all of them will end up being unusual. Okay, next topic is something we haven't done yet. We've only done 2 videos, but listener comments. There are a couple of newish ones from 2022. So we'll open up the comment bag, and Old No Names was nice enough to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for that. And asked if we would cover Terrence Malick. Well, we intend to do Badlands or Days of Heaven at some point this year because they're both having anniversaries. Badlands was 73 and Days of Heaven was 78. So one of those is bound to be on TCM at some point. And I'll record it and we'll do it probably in the fall.
Time to confess, I've never seen either of them. Badlands has been on my list for so long.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you weren't a fan. I think you weren't a fan of his. Okay.
Well, I'm not a fan of the Terrence Malick movies I've seen. But I've been told by many different people that I really need to check out Badlands. That movie stands out, and I think I will like it.
Days of Heaven is, well, I guess all of his movies are, but that's beautiful to look at. I forget the story's all that great. Badlands has got it all, as I recall. I think it's pretty well made, and I know it's got a pretty good story.
Even when I don't like Terrence Malick, his movies are exceptional to look at and interesting to talk about. So always worth covering him.
Mm-hmm. We have another comment, so we're going to do 2 today. This one is Teachin' Tony. He also, or she, they, whatever, gave us 5 stars as well. So thanks again, Teachin' Tony. Teachin' Tony liked our take on Heathers and wants to know if we'll review Say Anything.
Ooh.
Maybe next year when it's 35 years old, we'll cover it. That movie has not aged well with one big thing because John Cusack's character has been called, in more recent history, a stalker. I love the movie, but I may have to agree with that point.
I will be curious to see if it spoils the movie. Never been one of my favorites, but you like it. You're always more of a Cameron Crowe fan. Mm-hmm. You like a lot of his films.
For a first film, too, that's extraordinary.
I haven't seen it in a very long time. I struggle to imagine that it will turn me off. The stalker thing, which is not exactly a stretch, but it's all in the faith that you take it. We'll see. Like I said, I haven't seen it in a while. You've probably seen it far more recently than I have.
It's been a while.
I do remember when I saw it, I was like, girl, get on that plane. What are you doing?
She did, just with him.
Staying in this podunk town for him.
Well, spoiler alert, sorry.
Sorry.
I said that already. So thanks, Old No Names and Teachin' Tony, for those reviews and those comments. And we'll probably do this relatively often. We were doing it back in the fall, I think it was. And whoever it was that said we should change our name, more than one person probably has, but we listened to that person, as you've seen now, with Have You Ever Seen in our second week. I'm editing weeks in advance, so I don't know where we are, but yes, it's calendar, second week. So that's pretty much it for the video. We talked about an escaped convict in Out of Sight, which you're going to hear in a few minutes, the entire podcast. But the escaped convicts I'm covering by myself on Friday, The Defiant Ones, the classic Sidney Poitier, Tony Curtis movie. So that'll be Friday the 13th, leading into MLK Day. And then you and I are going to be back next week on the 16th, on MLK Day, with a review of Before Midnight, your third, that's 2 fingers, third movie in the month of Bev.
Yep.
I will actually myself again.
And I can spoil that we had a really interesting conversation. I mean, we spent days talking about it leading up to the podcast in a way. We just couldn't shut up about it. It's such an interesting movie to talk about.
Quick note before we wrap. We got an email. Maybe we'll read that email on the air at some point, maybe even next week. I forget the person's name, Anne, I think it was, that had a question for us. And I wouldn't say criticism, but wondered why we didn't talk about this and this and this. And I think I acknowledged in the thing, we had to do it twice, and we weren't sure what we'd said the first time.
A Star is Born?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm sorry. He screwed up. Mm-hmm. I can blame him, actually. It was all his fault.
I didn't plug the mic in properly.
Yes. I didn't have to tell them. But
well, we record right here. I sit facing this way. Bev would be off camera if she was sitting in a normal place, and the table here comes over more. The microphone's over a little bit more, too. And the laptop sits right here. I didn't notice that the microphone was not plugged into it. But it worked, and you could hear me okay, considering it was just the laptop microphone.
Yeah.
Bev was really hollow. I was hollow, too, but she was really hollow. Okay, well, then thanks for watching. Out of Sight, the entire podcast will follow. We'll see you probably next week with Before Midnight with another on-camera thing. We're not going to do this every time, maybe, but we're probably going to do it pretty often. On to the podcast. Breaking out of jail at night and then kidnapping a federal marshal demands you be alert. Even the best of us might fall asleep on the job and then get caught by the cops. But I'm never going back to jail, so the best way to make sure my fine ass stays free is to order Spark Plug coffee. Jailbirds might not be able to order Spark Plug coffee. We'll have to look into that. But if you've got a buddy on the outside, then that good friend can have a cup of joe ready and waiting for you when you climb out of the tunnel. Sparkplug provides you with premium Arabica beans that are fairly traded and the freshest in the Great White North. Speaking of Canada, we Canucks, and all those millions of Americans, will get their order delivered within a week, or most likely less than that. And the Canadian buyers will get it sent to them for free. But don't just buy Sparkplug once. You can do that, sure, because this is a free country, and you're not in jail. But if you join, well, maybe you are, but if you join the Autopilot Coffee Club, you'll not only save money on every order, but you'll get perks that the occasional purchaser does not. And this is no ratty old Coffee of the Month club. You can customize your membership, but you can also pause or drop out anytime you want. So go to sparkplug.coffee. If you add a slash and an HYES for Have You Ever Seen, you'll be able to take advantage of Have You Ever Seen's promo code and snag a 20% discount. They even have rotating seasonal blends, whether they be decaf, half calf, or whatever. It's the snappiest, coolest thing you'll do all day. Well, picking up J-Lo in a bar would be even cooler, but let's stay in our lane. And let's get you set up with all your Java needs by going to sparkplug.coffee.
And action! Have you ever seen
Out of Sight? Hi there, movie lovers, and thanks ever so much for downloading the 484th episode of our podcast. We've been reviewing classic motion pictures for nearly a decade, and we always spoil them. This is only the second week of our new name, Have You Ever Seen? We were called the Top 100 Project from March 2013 until the end of 2022, as in 2 weeks ago. It was time for a change, although most of what we will do from now on will be done pretty much the same way we've always done it. I'm the man who keeps his wigs in a nearly uncrackable safe. Leaves his diamonds out for all to see in the fish tank. Ryan Ellis. And here's the lady who's never going back to prison until she is, but who's also not going to go around bragging that she slept with a federal marshal. My wife, George Clooney, Bev.
That's me.
You got to be George Clooney, and I got to be, I guess, Albert Brooks. I wasn't even J-Lo. All right, the coming attractions trivia for this week's picture. Out of Sight. Steven Soderbergh has made some films that got scorched on Rotten Tomatoes, but mostly he's directed movies that got fresh tomatoes. Usually with very strong reviews, in fact. Only one theatrically released film that he directed rates higher than Out of Sight. Which one?
I was a little surprised that it is Sex, Lies, and Videotape.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not shocked. I don't think it's his best film, but I did like it a lot. And I think maybe because it was groundbreaking when it came out, it deserved that higher rating. That's probably why critics loved it so much, because it felt very fresh at the time and it wound up being pretty influential.
Those who listened last week and are listening now, so on A Star Is Born last week, I did say that he's the guy that started with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, so I gave it away before I got to the trivia question.
Okay, but just because that was a movie he made doesn't mean that I would know. I already knew. Oh, I see. I already knew that he directed Sex, Lies, and Videotape, along with many other great movies as I was looking at his Rotten Tomatoes scores. And it just reminds you how many wonderful movies he's made. Mm-hmm. He's kind of one of those directors that swings for the fences every time, or at least is keen on trying things that are different, really stretching himself out and pushing the envelope on what he is trying. And so it can be really exciting to see what he does, but sometimes he fails, and he's not afraid of failure.
The 2010s ones, and if he's made one this decade, I guess he has made one or two. I do want to see Logan Lucky again, but Haywire, don't remember much about that. But we've talked in other Soderbergh movies we've covered. I think probably Contagion. We were saying what's the best combination of the two? Yeah, that's what it was. What's the best combination of Soderbergh and Damon together? Of course, Damon's not in this movie. He didn't know him yet, probably.
The Informant.
We said it was The Informant because Damon's so funny in that, and that movie's so good in general. All right, well, secondary question. What's the best combination between Clooney and Soderbergh? It's probably this.
It's totally this.
Yeah. So I did say, by the way, theatrically released films, because Behind the Candelabra has basically the exact same numbers as Out of Sight does, but it was a percentage point or two higher when I first came up with the question, so that's why I want it to be there's only one.
I know, when I saw that score, for a split second, I thought I was going to get the rare opportunity to to push my glasses up my nose and say, you were wrong, Ryan. And then I reread your question. And of course, you put theatrically released in there, so that doesn't apply to Behind the Candelabra.
Which should have been released theatrically.
Should have been released theatrically, but if that movie had been released theatrically, I don't think it would have done that well on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that because it had the slightly lowered bar of being a TV movie, people had low expectations and then were blown away by what is a very good movie. Definitely check it out. It's one of his better films. But I don't think it's as good as Out of Sight.
Does star two of his regulars, though, Douglas and Damon, as lovers. Okay, Not Out of Mind was released 25 years ago by Universal Pictures on June 26th, 1998. 25 years ago. Good buzz and standout performances didn't turn this into a big hit. It scraped by at best. And if you go by the logic that a movie has to make more than twice as much at the box office to actually make a profit, then this was a failure. What a shame. But Bab, the movie is a quarter of a century old, so please remind us what it's about and give us the skinny on Out of Sight.
George Clooney is Jack Foley, a bank robber on the lam following a prison break. Jack is on his way to Detroit with his buddy Buddy to pull off one more big job so that they can retire from the life. Jennifer Lopez is U.S. Marshal Karen Sisko, who was Jack's hostage during the prison break and is now hot on his trail.
She's hot.
She is hot. It would be all straightforward, except that these two people are very, very sexy and unable to resist the intense chemistry they have with each other. As the big heist approaches, Karen has to choose between her dedication to law and justice and her once-in-a-lifetime connection with this criminal.
Or, in a nutshell, a little context, this is about White Boy Bob and his hilarious death. Accidental suicide is hilarious. It brings on many changes to White Boy Bob's head. The MASH theme, if you didn't catch that. That is one of the great unintentional deaths of all time. Isn't it something similar in one of the Coen brothers movies, Intolerable Cruelty? Somebody thinks that they've got a puffer, instead it's a gun. Also a very funny death. I think I've got that right.
I haven't seen that movie in years. They do a good job of setting it up in this film where they show him twice. Once he slips in the snow, so you just kind of see, oh, he's clumsy. And then you see him slip in the exact same way on the stairs earlier when they first get to the house. Otherwise, it feels too much like a Deus Ex Machina,
right,
whereas that setup helps sell it a little better.
Mm-hmm. Maurice's death, a couple minutes later, isn't funny at all, but the way that Don Cheadle plays it, the way he slumps over onto White Boy Bob, you're glad he's dead. He's a horrible person. He deserves to die. He's a killer, all of that. But that one's not funny at all.
We'll talk all the time about how our ratings tend not to be so much because of violence in a movie as much as they are about seeing the consequences of violence.
And that's what this is.
And that was like a grotesque consequence of violence.
Dead.
And the look on his face feels really real. This movie doesn't shy away from those moments, even though it's very funny and very light. It's still really grounded like that.
And we are rooting for a bank robber and a diamond thief as well. Clooney liked that about this movie. He liked the old guys, like a Cagney, for example, that often played a bad guy, but we liked him anyway. Or even if he wasn't a bad guy, he's doing bad things. Even Jennifer Lopez's character, Karen Sisko, is with an FBI agent who's cheating on his wife, which isn't her failing, it's obviously his, but she's still doing it, so she's culpable in some way. And her father talks about how she was with some other guy, wasn't a bank robber long ago? Yeah. And look at the end of this movie, which of course we'll talk about a little later on. She's obviously deliberately set it up, so she's got Hajira Henry, Sam Jackson's character, to help Jack escape Glades again. So if anyone found out about that, she should at least lose her job as a cop. If not, be put in jail herself. All right, we'll get back to all that in a second, but first the Rotten Tomatoes numbers and so on. 94% of them liked the movie. I guess we just said that a minute ago, and maybe we didn't get the number, but 94. 7.9 out of 10 is the average. There are 102 reviews on the site, but only 74% of audiences, and that does track with the fact that nobody really went to see it on the big screen in 1998. Also in June, maybe that didn't help. That's a pretty tough time of year to come out if you're not an action movie or not really a comic book movie back then, but Jurassic Park, they dominated. Saving Private Ryan, that was the summer of Saving Private Ryan. This
was kind of the time when anything that vaguely resembled Pulp Fiction usually did well in the theater. And this was, I think Roger Ebert called it the first true follow-up to Pulp Fiction that wasn't just an imitation.
Makes sense.
And I would agree in that it drew from the influence of Pulp Fiction, but it did something new and unique and on its own. But it still feels very much like that new kind of filmmaking. And it doesn't feel 25 years old because it was ahead of its time when it came out. And I think J-Lo said, even though it failed at the time, she never considered it a big success. She still to this day has people come up to her all the time telling her that it's their favorite movie.
I'm not a huge fan of hers. We've never covered her before. Most of her rom-coms are not very good, and she's not very good in them. Sometimes somebody's good in a movie, a rom-com or whatever, but the movie's not good. Hustlers is good, no doubt about it. Maybe a little overrated.
And she's wonderful in it, too.
And she's maybe the best thing in it. One of the reasons this movie doesn't feel like it aged, though, maybe, because neither of the two of them, especially her, look like they've aged. He finally is looking older now. He's about 60. He should look older now, but he only just now, him and Pitt and Cruise are finally showing their age the last couple of years.
That is such a good point.
J-Lo still isn't, though.
She looks amazing. And you're so right. The only difference is that he has no gray in his hair at this point. God, he looked good in this movie. She looks amazing. I mean, the two of them are just so attractive.
Yeah. So back to the numbers again. The movie was 57th at the box office in 1998. Saving Private Ryan was number 1. I saw that twice on the big screen. The Truman Show was 12th, and Shakespeare in Love was 18th. We've covered all of those movies and some other ones I'll mention before the day is over here from 1998. The movie was nominated for 2 Oscars and maybe could have won them both. The adapted screenplay by Scott Frank. That must have been Bill Condon for Gods and Monsters, which was a good choice and one of my favorite ever Oscar speeches, partly because of Ian McKellen and Lynn Redgrave and Brendan Fraser in the audience, who were so thrilled for their director. I don't want to take that Oscar away from that guy because it's a good movie and that whole moment was so awesome, but this is probably the best screenplay of that year. It also was nominated for the editing, and that's, of course, Anne V. Coates. I guess you could call her a legend. She won an Oscar for Lawrence of Arabia so many years before. Despite its length, one of the best edited movies of all time. Some of the most famous edits of all time, of course. The biggest one is that match being blown up by Lawrence to a shot of the desert at either dusk or dawn, which is red. And this movie, with its editing style, was probably a little bit harder to follow than even Pulp Fiction was and confusing and stuff. But it certainly could have won. I think it was Saving Private Ryan that won that. And that's a good choice, too, to make that war footage work the way it did. This might not have been number 2, but it probably should have been in both cases. As for AFI nominations, only 2 didn't make either list. The Top 100 Thrills, mostly for the ending. It's not really thrilling otherwise, I wouldn't say. And the Top 100 Genres in the Gangster category. Not really a gangster film, but I guess we're talking about the Maurice angle on this. It wasn't nominated for the Top 100 Laughs or the Top 100 Passions.
Passions is
it should have made the Top 100 Passions.
Belongs. They got robbed.
Well, you chose this. It's the month of Bev. Second movie we've covered so far. Third movie in the whole month, but second one for you and I to do together. A few days ago, I covered Sherlock Jr. Give us your thoughts now. I guess you already have, but more thoughts on Out of Sight.
So, yeah, this is one of my favorites. In my 20s, this movie was definitely in my top 10. It is so slick and fun. It's really smart. Soderbergh followed this up with Ocean's 11, which is a slick Hollywood version of Out of Sight.
That wasn't the next movie, though.
Sorry, he didn't immediately follow it up with, but I would say that the spiritual follow-up to Out of Sight was Ocean's 11. George Clooney in the lead, and it's a heist film.
Right.
And
Cheadle's in that too, of course.
Yes, that's right. While Ocean's 11 is very fun, I haven't seen it in years, but I remember enjoying it a lot when it came out. But for my money, I'm just going to always love the edgy version of something more. And, of course, just the sheer power of George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez's chemistry.
I heard this story years ago. I don't think I'm misquoting it, though, because I remember it quite well. Jay Moore said on some podcast that he and Clooney were on a plane together years after this movie came out. He was talking about how much he liked it and loved their chemistry, loved the trunk scene, probably the most famous thing in this whole movie. But Moore said something about how Clooney said, no. Yeah, but you guys must have at least been friendly, right? No. You were hot for each other. No. So if Moore is telling the truth and Clooney wasn't in a bad mood or just fucking with him or something like that, then these two people who look like they're so in love with this movie weren't. Either he didn't like her or they didn't like each other.
Well, just because he wasn't into her like that doesn't mean they didn't like each other.
But for him to say it the way that Moore described it is almost like he's saying, you may think the movie's good, but I hated that woman. I don't know. Maybe
it's
I'm
true.
misjudging.
I mean, it's Jay Moore, not somebody who I generally take without a grain of salt. It's
yeah, true.
Something that came out of Jay Moore's mouth.
There have been some really good romantic movies or rom-coms or what have you where the two leads didn't love each other that much or didn't like each other, so it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world. They don't have to be fucking to actually look like they want to on screen. I like this movie a lot, too. I would say I like it a little bit more as I've gotten older, and it does, much like Jackie Brown last month. So only 3 weeks ago we covered Jackie Brown. Ray Nicolette, Michael Keaton in both of these movies, same character. I don't really know why he's in this movie, actually. It doesn't really seem to need to be here. It's just a nice thing with the Elmer Leonard connection because he wrote both books.
I think there was an opportunity to put him in, and they took it. I don't think it was the right choice. Because they do not seem like a remotely convincing couple for even 1 second.
Right. He's so much older than she was at that point. Well, I guess he always
but
will be
also,
older
they're
than
like
her.
in a room together. They don't look at each other.
He's talking to her father the whole time.
Yeah, it's so
He
bizarre.
also seems so sleazy in this in the way he doesn't seem in Jackie Brown.
Yeah.
He's such a straight arrow cop when Jackie says to him, you ever thought about taking money when he's marking all the bills for Ordell's money? And the way he puts it is as if, no, I'm a clean cop. I'm not going to fucking do that. He doesn't say that. He says it more cool than that because it's Tarantino. But his implication is that, no, I don't even think about it because I'm an honorable person. But this guy, money never comes up. He's with the FBI now, which is not what he's ATF in the other movie. But this guy would take money. He's cheating on his wife. I don't want to drive that into the ground too much, but they bring it up a lot. Obviously, Dennis Farina, as their father, really does. Partly because his daughter's with a guy that there's probably no future there, and he doesn't really respect him in the first place. I love when Ray walks in with his FBI shirt.
I know.
Hi, I'm with the crime-busting organization. You might want to stay away from me.
What does the dad say? He has like a funny line about the T-shirt.
I forget the line, but I know what you were talking about, yeah.
So I know why they did it, but I don't think it was really right for the movie. That scene sticks out. You never wonder, what about Ray? When she's finally making things happen with Jack. He's the last thing on your mind, the fact that she has anything remotely resembling a commitment with Ray. And there is a line when they're at the bar. You say the most famous scene is them in the trunk. The most famous scene is the bar. What are you talking about?
Let's right up there with it.
That cross-cutting, woo, we'll talk about that more later, but There is a line in that bar when Clooney's saying to her, sometimes you just have a connection like this and it's just so intense and it's the kind of thing that only happens maybe 2-3 times in your life. And what does she say back? Or once. Yeah. As in, she's saying to him, this has never happened to me before.
And she likes the bad boys because she has that bank robber boyfriend in the past. Or whatever. I think it was a bank robber. And the dad says about how you took him down. So either she killed him or she at least shot him like she does.
Shot him.
Jack here at the end does the same thing. He wasn't going to go back, and then he was because she wouldn't kill him, even though he wanted to, basically. He'd rather have died. I think he meant that, too. And he puts his mask on. You can kill me. You don't have to look at my face. He also mentions in the trunk scene about Adele. They were married. He liked her, even loved her. But there wasn't that. The funny thing, though, talking about famous scenes, talking about the connection with Ray Nicolette, is that neither movie, Jackie Brown or Out of Sight, succeeded all that much. They weren't that far apart, though. Jackie Brown was the end of 1997. This is the middle of 1998. But it's not like everyone was talking about either movie. So this whole connection that would have been fun and cool to have a guy who played Batman not that many years before, still on that high in some ways, is playing a character in both of these films, but not that many people even saw either of these films, which is a shame. They both should have been more successful than they were.
I saw them both many times. I made up for everybody else, I think.
Keaton's cameo was free.
Yeah.
And Miramax didn't charge Universal. Maybe Tarantino was involved in this and said, fine, just let him have him for a day or two. You got Michael Keaton in your movie playing the same character. It doesn't hurt anything. And then Sam Jackson at the end is also a free cameo. And they both were in Jackie Brown together, of course. And they've been in other movies since. They're both in RoboCop, the remake that came out 6 or 8 years ago. And have they both been in the MCU?
Yes.
Probably one of the Spider-Man movies. Well, the one Spider-Man movie that Michael Keaton was in so far.
And it's interesting that Michael Keaton came back to play the same part from Jackie Brown that he plays in this movie. And Sam Jackson, while he's in both movies, is playing 2 totally different parts. He's not going back as Ordell. So I guess they're not trying to be too straight.
No.
They could have cast someone else for that part, but I'm glad they didn't. Because even though he's only in the movie for a minute, he kind of steals that scene.
He and Clooney, if they've ever done anything together beyond this one, I can't think of what it was. They should have been, though. It seemed like a cool combination. He would have been a great addition to the Oceans team, although Cheadle is so much fun playing the Cockney. And Barney! Rubble! Trouble! I always remember that line from that movie. But I think Clooney and Jackson would have been a great team. For a few minutes they are at the end of this movie. And like I said already, if they find out what Karen has done, she has got to be probably put in jail and certainly have her job taken away for setting this up. Because Hajira even says, I was supposed to go last night, but some lady wanted to make me wait till the next day. Now, they were both going to the same place, to Glades, the two criminals. But they show her in the front seat with a very slight smile on her face. We know what's going on here. And then the opening song, It's Your Thing, plays at the end as well. But the movie is all over the place, and we usually are with our podcast too. We go with our train of thought. It starts with something in the middle, which I think was not that common around this time. It's become so common since. We so often will see Swordfish, the John Travolta movie starts that way, where we see the job at the end, the holdup or whatever it is at the end, and we come back to that at the end. So it's going all the way back. In this case, it's, I guess, somewhere in the middle of the movie chronologically. It's hard to tell exactly. When
Goodfellas does that, too. Goodfellas starts with them burying the body. Yeah.
But I don't think it was that common to do that the way it's become ever since. But Clooney comes out of what we don't know at the time, a job interview with Albert Brooks' company. It's to be a security guard, and that's why he's so mad. I like how he immediately goes to rob that bank. This isn't a matter of, okay, take a break, go get a coffee, think about this. No, he sees a bank across the street, gonna rob it.
Doesn't think it through, which is how he got in trouble.
He admits he doesn't always think things through. He's very smart, but he's also, in some ways, dumb. But it's a great idea for a robbery because he doesn't use a gun. I don't think he ever did use a gun. He said something about that. Maybe that's why he doesn't ever have too long in jail. He breaks out of jail in this movie, but it seems like he was paroled other times because he's been in more than once. And if he broke up before, he would have been in jail for the rest of his life if they caught him. But not using a gun is very smart. Telling the clerk that his friend, who's the guy doesn't even know, over there talking to the manager, who's not even the manager, but he's a manager. He's got a gun. He'll kill your manager over there if you do anything. And then she gives him the money. He would have got away if he'd left the car running. I think Adele says that to him, razzing him when he's on the phone with her and he's in jail. But that's the way the movie starts, and that's somewhere in the middle of the storyline. And that's one of the many examples why this movie probably should have, well, at least it was nominated for the editing. But it could have won, because we get that freeze frame fade. Actually, it doesn't fade there, does it? I think it cuts to the next scene. But we often have a freeze frame and a fade type of thing. I don't remember too many movies using that. There are freeze frames in a lot of movies, but usually if it's a freeze frame, you cut to the next thing. I like the way that Coates does it here.
Soderbergh was really on the bleeding edge of the 90s style of incorporating jump cuts and freeze frames and these unusual, edgy editing choices. But the movie, like you said earlier, was cut by N.V. Coates. I think she's an absolute legend. She's responsible, like you said, for what's considered the greatest single edit in film history in Lawrence of Arabia. She won an Oscar for that. She also won a Lifetime Achievement Oscar posthumously the year after she passed away. And she was considered one of the greatest editors of her generation. I'm often asked what I think is the best edited film because I'm an editor. I always use Out of Sight as an example. It's a highly complex story told in fragmented bits, out of order. There's a massive number of characters and they all have unique relationships with each other. Best of all, the pace just really crackles. It never stops being fun. It never loses its forward momentum. And at the time, it was really innovative. I think still looks really fresh and cool, the style that they use with the jump cuts and the freeze frames and the cross-cutting as well. I hesitate to call it the best edited film of all time because I hate naming things best of all time. But the Motion Picture Editors Guild named it the 52nd best edited film of all time. And for a movie that wasn't a huge hit and wasn't necessarily a big part of the zeitgeist, that's an incredible accomplishment. And this is something I like. They named the 75 best edited pictures instead of just rounding it to 100. And all I could think is, well, you're an editor.
They cut it for time.
You can always cut it for time. You can always make it shorter. I always say, like, I'm an editor, everything can be shorter. Well, they started with 100 and they ended up with 75 because they're editors. I don't know that for a fact, but I believe it to be true.
Makes sense. What was number one on that list? Did you write down?
I tried to find it. It was like one of those 404 error not found. I found this detail in Wikipedia and I couldn't find the source. And by the way, Soderbergh edits some of his own films.
And he shoots them all the time now,
He's his own cinematographer. He's not always his own editor, but he does edit his own films. And he was a professional freelance editor before he broke out as a director. So you add that sensibility with one of the greatest editors in history, it truly is a masterpiece of editing.
You know what's interesting, too, about this same year is that he produced Pleasantville, which I loved. But I also remember him saying, and maybe it was about this movie because it was something different finally, that he said, if I've got to set up another over-the-shoulder shot, I'm going to blow my brains out. I think it's in Sex Lies, but one of the movies he did, he's got long takes of reaction shots when people are just talking in a diner or something like that. And he says in a commentary, maybe it's that movie, that he wanted to have a scene where every time somebody's talking, the camera's on the other person. So it's just reactions the whole time. He did some of that, but not really all of that. So he was doing innovative and unusual things a little bit even back then, but I guess he didn't think he kept on. Although his 90s movies are all independent. King of the Hill is pretty good.
I love King of the Hill.
Nobody saw it other than
nobody
10 of us.
saw it. It is such a wonderful movie.
So it's funny that he would say, I can't keep on doing this kind of stuff. And then he does movies like Out of Sight, The Limey, which I don't think you love. That's a pretty good movie with flashbacks and things as well. Aaron Brockovich, which Coates edited as well. And then Ocean's 11 and so on.
And Traffic.
That's right, we covered Traffic too. We've only covered, I guess it's now 3 of his movies. He produced Pleasantville, but directing, Contagion, Traffic, and this. I think there's only 3 that he's actually directed that we've covered. But anyway, the point being that for him to make that point when he was the unusual guy through the 90s anyway, he could have gone on to be a mainstream dude after Sex Lies, was I think a pretty good hit and was just so talked about by everybody. It was one of the first, that I recall, at least Sundance movies that people knew about before it ever came out in theaters. Of course, it won the Golden Palm at Cannes, so...
It's kind of credited with being one of the real vanguard films that started the whole movement of indie films, those 90s indie films. Sex, Lies, and Videotape is always listed as one of the films that started that trend.
But didn't have to, didn't have to settle for that kind of filmmaking. And then gets more big-budget stuff like this. And even though this didn't succeed, I think he probably agrees with Clooney and Lopez that it's one of the best things they've ever done.
He hadn't had many successes after Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and he feared that he was, to quote him, in an art house ghetto.
That's right, I've read that line.
Yeah, and so he wasn't intent on staying in that lane, even though I think he still has a very art house sensibility in a lot of his films.
Yeah.
And when he picked Out of Sight, he had to pick between 2 scripts. Did you see what the other one was?
Remind me.
It was Human Behavior, the first Charlie Kaufman movie to get made, and it ended up being directed by Michel Gondry. It's a movie I like. It's a very interesting movie, but it's definitely that Charlie Kaufman quirky, and he had to choose between something like that would have been considered very much in his wheelhouse, and Out of Sight, which felt more like a Hollywood movie. You know, it's a heist film, it's a romance, and it's funny. And
has to cover a lot of genres. That may be one of the reasons why it didn't do that well.
Which is his forte.
Hard to market, though.
Yeah. And they said it was a mistake to release it in the summer. And then following Out of Sight, that was really probably the peak of his career when he was making the most money in the box office.
Traffic and Aaron Brockovich the same year. He got nominated for both. He won for Traffic, and both were mega hits.
Yes.
How often does that happen?
And then the Ocean series have been...
That's James Cameron level stuff, or at least one year.
Yeah. He really was an A-list director from then on, and I love that he didn't stick to that lane either. He really just continues to push himself, push boundaries, and try different things.
No, gonna retire. No, gonna retire. No. He's made so many movies since he was gonna retire somewhere in the mid-20s.
I remember that. Yeah, that's right.
He and Anthony Hopkins, Sean Penn, I'm gonna quit, and then they make dozens of movies after that.
And I find it so interesting that you said that he was sick of doing over-the-shoulder shots, when I think that's a huge part of his style. I say that because all of his films, if they have components in common, one of them is that he has this really voyeuristic style that it feels a little bit like you're a fly on the wall.
Sex Lies, no wonder it starts with that.
Yeah, voyeurism, exactly. Over-the-shoulder shots are a big part of that. And I love that he does that thing, just like you described, where he's just as likely to focus on the listener as he is the talker. I think he understands that what's important can just as often be somebody's reaction to what's being said as the speaker. And it makes it feel more intimate. And he has a tendency also to hold on a shot for longer than most directors would, to let you sit with the contemplation of a character who's just absorbing everything that's going on around them. It's a wonderful thing. I wish more movies did this, where they just let the audience slow down with the character and think what they must be thinking.
We talked about it in Jackie Brown.
Jackie Brown
multiple times.
One of my favorite scenes where Ordell is just thinking about everything that has happened in the last hour and trying to sort it all out. And we're thinking along with him.
And Jackie has a scene in the dressing room where she has to get into character to be flustered, I guess, as well. But we see her sit and think for a minute, which most movies would never do, especially when it's already so long. Jackie Brown, that is.
I kind of fell into an Ann V. Coates rabbit hole today when I was researching for the movie. And one of the things that she said was she really follows the lead of the actors, and she considers herself an actor's editor. The performances are everything. Those are the beats that you follow when you have good actors. They make the decisions for you. You just have to know how to see them. I think that's wonderful advice. And I think that Soderbergh has that same instinct too, where he allows you to really live in these characters' heads in a way that other movies like this rarely do.
Right. We talked about the way to shoot something. Well, the trunk scene, that apparently was one long take. And when they screened it, it died.
Huh.
Which is surprising because I'm sure it was pretty well done. Now we have a lot of edits. We do see Buddy a few different times looking through Karen's purse to find out she's a federal marshal.
See the close-up of the hand. Right. One of the first images that always comes to my mind when I think about this.
I think he's talking about Adele and didn't have that snap, so his left hand. But yes, he's got his hand on her hip, and it's not that he's necessarily doing anything wrong. We might look at that a little differently now, that he's touching her when she shouldn't be. But they've already kidnapped her. That's worse than touching her.
It's a scene that has not aged perfectly in 25 years. I think anybody with an open mind watching this movie, understanding it's old, is going to take it in the spirit it's intended.
Let's hope so.
This is a good person. He's a good man. He has no...
I don't know about that.
Okay. But he is a good man. Don't you think that Jack Foley's a good man?
In this world, he is.
He's a bank robber, but he never threatens people. He's not a violent man. We never see him commit violence. We see him stick his neck out for people for no reason. He protects Ripley for no reason. Well, I guess he's trying to...
Midge, really.
No, I'm talking about when they're in prison.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
And he's getting shaken down by Maurice. We haven't really talked much about Maurice yet.
I love the take in prison, one of my favorite lines Clooney's ever delivered. And this, of course, is a time when he was coming off of Batman. He was still on... I liked ER a lot, and he was good on ER. But back then, if you're a TV actor, you don't belong in the movies, not as a star anyway. That was the prevailing thought by Hollywood anyway. But I love the take in prison when the thug gets up, when Maurice tells him to go handle it. Uh-oh.
Yes.
You could read that line 100 times, but the fact he's not scared of this guy, who would be able to probably beat him up, and then he beats him up with the big book by smashing him in the face with it. That's pretty cool. And also, of course, the other really well-delivered line, this is Scott Frank or Elmore Leonard or both, maybe. But when we talk about him not being violent, he does kill one person in this movie, and it is Kenneth, Isaiah Washington's character. I think it's to Maurice. Never killed anybody before, right? Not until recently, no. Meaning seconds ago. It's the first time I ever killed anybody. This guy probably never really pulled a gun. Oh, these pretty good shots. So maybe he pulled a gun before or shot a gun before. But he has never killed anybody. And also in that scene, is this movie saying that either he was about to or already had, Kenneth that is, raped Midge?
He either is about to or is already in the middle of raping Midge.
What an idiot. You're busy.
That reminds me of
Forget the morals of not raping somebody. You're busy.
That reminds me of a neat detail, though, because he gets out of bed and she's so badass, she throws a blanket over his head.
So he's
distracted.
He
can't fight.
Yeah.
And she doesn't think twice. She's not a damsel in distress. Midge is a badass.
She's Nancy Allen, no wonder.
True.
Good casting.
Like every character in this movie, you truly feel that they have a backstory. And part of this comes from Elmore Leonard's book. Part of it comes from an excellent screenplay and well-directed and a great actress in the part, which is a throwaway part.
Yeah.
And they cast somebody not hot and young.
She's hot.
She looks great,
Like,
but
she looks great, but she's not a young hottie that you'd be like, oh, this rich guy's in love with his maid. She's good looking, but she's not an A+. And she's a badass. She's the one that goes to the door. She lies to them. She will not tell them that he's in the house. She's so gutsy.
Right.
Kind of like Karen Sisco, who is one of the great badass characters of crime films of the 90s. This woman has steel in her veins. I have many favorite scenes in this movie, but...
Chino?
No.
I like when she takes out Chino. And also when she takes out Kenneth.
Well, that's the thing, is this movie keeps giving her opportunities to remind us how competent and unshakable she is. The Chino scene is good, but that's for comedy. My favorite, the you want to tussle scene with Kenneth. He's so intimidating.
He's bigger than her, for one thing.
He has her dead to rights. If that was me in that room, I would be sure that I'd be definitely raped and maybe dead. She never even breaks a sweat because she knows she's got this, and she has no time for shitheads like Kenneth.
She has a weapon. That helps.
She has a weapon, but that moment at the end after she beats him and she collapses her baton on the wall. Oh, is there like a cooler moment in movies? In the 90s, that was lousy with cool moments in movies. It gives me chills every time I see it.
You know what I'm thinking of right now with J-Lo? Because I've never been her biggest fan, even though we just said a minute ago that, of course, she's really talented, well, a few minutes ago. And she's still so beautiful and all that. But I mentioned Hustlers, where if nothing else, and she does a lot of things right in that movie, she's cool. What is she in this movie? You just said it. She's cool.
She's so cool.
Enough of this wedding planner stuff. Those who can't do plan. Or what the hell that fucking line is in that stupid movie.
Those movies made her so much more money.
True.
It's just true. She is kind of a hit or miss actress. I'm never going to go see a movie just because J-Lo's in it. I think, and she would probably agree, that she is a better musician and performer than an actress.
But she is not bad casting in this, because she could have been.
Wonderful.
Not that Clooney was George Clooney yet.
Do you remember who almost got cast?
No.
Got very close to being cast with Sandra Bullock. They wanted Bullock. She was an A-lister. But they said when they screen tested her with Clooney, they had amazing chemistry together. But they were like, this is an amazing pairing, but it's not for this movie. The sexual chemistry, sure, but she's just not Karen Sisco. J-Lo brought something else to it. Sandra Bullock is always a level of silliness to her, whereas J-Lo, I bought it. There's not one part of me that thought she couldn't kick Kenneth's ass in that moment.
Well, the woman that got the role when it became a TV show would have been a good choice for this too, but certainly less of a star than J-Lo was. And I don't think J-Lo was really a pop star yet, was she? She had played Selena, and that was a pretty well-regarded movie, but I don't think it was some huge hit or anything. Anaconda, which people knew about, but I don't think it was a big hit either.
U-Turn, I think it come out before this.
Right. Not a hit either for Oliver Stone. But all those movies were reputable enough and known enough, I guess, that she had a name going. But Carla Gugino played Karen Sisco on TV for years. And, of course, she's one of my favorites, period. I love her physically, for sure, but she also can act, and she's got a bit of a badass quality, too. So
what show is this?
Karen Sisco.
It's just called Karen Sisco?
Yeah. I meant to watch it because I liked it at a site, and I really liked her a lot, but I never did see it. From 2003 to 2007, Robert Forster played her dad.
Get out!
I like the chemistry with Lopez and Dennis Farina, too, as her dad, because it seems like an unusual pairing, but it's really great. He obviously can be a badass and funny and everything else. He was so awesome in Get Shorty, which definitely is, it's not really a Pulp Fiction spin-off or anything like that, or a knockoff, because it was being made before Pulp Fiction took off the way it did. I think that's true anyway. You can't really say that was influenced that much by Pulp Fiction. Travolta's in both, granted, and it's got some of the same kinds of qualities. But Farina, in many ways, steals Get Shorty from everybody else. I've seen that movie so many times, I love it, and it's got a tremendous cast. Snatch is another one where he steals the movie. Chris and I covered that for Scoring at the Movies a year or two ago. He's not like that in this. He's actually more the nice father. But you do see, because we know from other movies, I guess, that he's got that menace to him as well. And he's also, I think, a marshal. His credit online is Marshal Sisco. I think that means he's a federal marshal, not that his name, maybe it is, but I don't think his name is Marshal Sisco. I think it's that he's federal marshal something Sisco.
I don't know how this family is giving each other Chanel suits for birthday presents, along with guns. That scene is such a beautiful bit of compact, economical storytelling. You learn so much about her, about him, about their relationship together when she just opens up a present and it's a gun and she loves it. The story just tells itself. Everybody can fill in the blanks. It's so elegant.
And that's the gun that shoots Jack in the leg.
She loses the gun along with the suit, I think. She loses both of her presents.
I don't think she loses it, does she? Because he took it, meaning Jack did, but he brings it with him on an airplane, which even before 9/11 seems pretty unlikely. But anyway, he got it up to Detroit when he and Buddy flew up there for the diamond job and left it on the pillow after they had their night of sex. Well, let's talk about that scene. You say that's the most famous scene. I'm not going to argue with you. I just think the trunk scene is, and we don't really talk that much about the trunk scene. It's pretty cool. She's definitely in command because, well, she's not in command, but she knows she's got that gun because they've got her other gun. She took the shotgun out with her. That's what it was. And Kenneth grabbed that off of her.
Right.
Or maybe it was Jack that did when Kenneth grabbed her. But anyway, they've got the shotgun away from her. But she's got a backup gun that he doesn't know about. And the trunk. So that scene's awesome, and you get that sexual chemistry. There's funny stuff. I'm not going to take any more of your shit. He's covered in filth and crap and maybe even literal shit as well. But okay, the hotel scene where the 3 nerds come up to hit on her, and
Only
she
2 of the nerds come up.
Oh, that's true. They all want to.
It's a misdirect.
Yeah, that's right. Then it's Clooney standing there in the reflection. That's such a great shot of this dreamboat guy to begin with, but it's a dreamy type of shot. The movie's not saying that he isn't really there, but you can infer from it that he's not really there because it does seem like she's imagining that.
But she's wishing that he's
And she
there.
dreamed about him already.
Yes! Oh, the
When
great
he's
dream
in the bath.
sequence.
What a different scene.
Pay yourself.
So
God.
many movies have had the woman naked in the bathtub, but we don't see anything necessarily, usually nudity-wise, but we know that she's got nothing on, and he's the one not vulnerable because he has clothes on. In this case, reverse it.
The first time I saw this movie and that scene happens...
You orgasmed?
He grabs her wrist and she just gets in the tub with him. Whew, let me tell you, I thought about that scene a lot for the following weeks and months. Along with the sex scene. Now, I said that this movie was considered the 52nd greatest edited film of all time, according to the Editors Guild. So EW did a poll of the sexiest movies of all time. Mm-hmm. This was number 1. Truly one of the greatest, if not the greatest sex scene in a film ever. Of course, there's an hour of build-up. There's this whole cat and mouse happening between the 2 of them. And it's all leading to this point. And the build-up has been so exquisite. And then Ann Coates cross-cuts this scene between the hotel bar and the hotel room. And if you look at the editing technique too, they aren't cross-cutting so much as they're fully integrating both scenes together. The audio from the bar is playing under the shot of Jack and Karen getting closer in the hotel room. The music is consistent from one place to the next. The lighting, the tone, they all have this perfect consistency as if the 2 events are happening simultaneously, and you feel that in the moment. And the scene understands that the lead up is the actual sexy part, that the conversation they have in the hotel bar is just as responsible for what they're feeling in bed with one another as what they're doing in bed with one another. It marries those events and it creates this visceral and immersive experience. And just as you're 100% invested going along on the ride with Jack and Karen, those freeze frames, mm-hmm. There's such teases. Oh my God, it's so sexy. The editing itself and the lighting, it's erotic filmmaking, even though it never feels lascivious. He's not really titillating exactly.
She's not naked. You don't see anything.
Yeah. It never feels porny. It just feels hot.
And it's homaging Don't Look Now, a Nicholas Roeg horror film from 1973, I believe. Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie are, I believe, married, and they have a sex scene, and people say they did it for real. Roeg cross-cuts the sex scene with them getting dressed afterwards. This is sexier. That's fine. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. But here you've got a conversation. You're right. That's more sexy than, well, okay, if we actually watched all what they do, these 2 beautiful people doing it, would be pretty hot. But their conversation is at least close to being as sexy as them doing the act.
Yeah. And if you want to conjure the hottest sex you've ever had, I think the thing that makes good sex into great sex is chemistry, is like the relationships you make before you actually get into bed with one another. And that's what that scene conjures. The scene in Don't Look Now, that's conjuring marital intimacy. Because you go from this erotic scene to the comfort of just getting dressed together. The familiarity they have with one another's bodies is like the opposite sentiment with the same technique.
Mm-hmm. Well, the key part of the movie, too, of course, is Ving Rhames. He is the 3rd leading character in this film. One of the more fun roles he's ever had. And again, a guy who had a lot of chemistry with Clooney. Rhames, of course, was in Pulp Fiction, so there's another connection with Pulp Fiction with this important character in both of them. And then Chris and I just covered him recently in Undisputed. He was in that a couple years after this came out. Of course, we've never covered a Mission Impossible movie, and I think he's been in, if not all of them, and certainly most of those with Cruise, another guy he has pretty good chemistry with, and he's fun. You think of him as the intimidating guy from Pulp Fiction or Undisputed, but I love him in these roles where he's more fun, actually, too, Out of Sight and the Mission Impossible series.
And I never recognized him as Marcellus Wallace, probably the first few times I saw this, and I think it's just a testament to how much he embodies one character or another.
One thing I like about this movie, too, is that we find out through the dialogue that he sold Jack out, but not in the way we've seen in any other crime movie. He did it because of his conscience, and Jack doesn't hold it against him.
It's because Jack's not actually a bad person.
Even if you're not a bad person, you can hold that against somebody because...
You can still be bad.
He confessed to his sister, and that's how they got busted before, and they end up in one of the many prisons. One of the clever things as well by Soderbergh, and of course the whole production team, when they wear blue, they're in the Glades prison, and when they wear yellow, that's Lompoc. And yellow's where Ripley was.
And Maurice.
Right. I love that Maurice is Snoopy because if you pet him, he goes down. He's a boxer faking. There's a funny moment. Cheadle's got some funny moments in this movie. Maybe his funniest moment is when he's fighting the guy, and then he looks at the guy. You gonna hit me or not?
Come on.
And Cheadle was just becoming a player. He's never really been a true star, I wouldn't say. He's more of a character actor who's been in big movies, usually in a supporting role. Terrific actor. Could have been a star. But he had been in Devil in a Blue Dress with Denzel a couple years before this and was just starting to get to that point.
He did Boogie Nights first,
Boogie Nights was before this with Louis Guzman. They have a scene or two together in that. And then they're partners in Traffic for Soderbergh. The other funny guy, maybe the funniest guy in this movie, pound for pound, because he's not in the movie that much, pound for pound, that's not a shot at his weight, is Louis Guzman. Chino, right down, I think the last thing he ever says in the movie when Karen puts him down and cuffs him.
Mean.
Can you tell me about that magic trick you do? To Adele.
Fake legs!
Yeah, but also, you're mean.
How do you twinkle the toes?
It's funny with Adele and it's funny with Karen, the way he talks to both of them.
But he's not the funniest person in the movie.
No, but he's one of the funniest people.
We have not talked about Steve Zahn at all.
That's true.
And in a movie with all these incredible actors, including a very brief scene with a not famous at the time Viola Davis, who plays Kenneth's sister.
She was in quite a few Soderbergh movies at this point.
But she was not a star.
Including Traffic.
She was definitely not a household name.
No, it's true. But he used her in Solaris and Traffic, and I think one or two other ones.
But Steve Zahn, maybe I've seen him in some. Oh,
That
he's
Thing
in
You Do.
And Reality Bites.
He's the funniest thing in That Thing You Do, and he's the most, I don't know, but tragic, but more sad part of Reality Bites, isn't he?
Yeah, he's not the funniest person in Reality Bites. He's kind of forgettable. But in a movie with all of these incredible stars, all this charisma, all this star power, he still manages to steal every scene he's in.
Yeah.
Particularly every scene he has with J-Lo as Cisco, because she's so serious and he is so
Stoned.
stoned and desperate and kind of whiny and pleading and childlike. He nails it. He's so funny.
But also he has one of the most horrifying moments in the whole movie. We don't really see it, though. It's all implied, somewhat shown, I guess. But that's when White Boy Bob, Kenneth, and of course Maurice go and kill people. And they make him do it, too. He shoots somebody. We see him pull the trigger. We don't know what happened to that person. Well, we do, but we didn't see any evidence of it. And the last thing in that scene is White Boy Bob using a hatchet on somebody. Good God. As Maurice is using a red spray paint can to black out the camera. That's probably...
No, he's not blacking out the camera. He's writing slurs because they want the murder to get passed off as like an act of a hate crime because the...
But he is literally
person they murdered, I think they didn't call her transgender. They called her cross-dresser, but transgender woman, so they write homophobic slurs all over the walls, hoping that police will think that it's just a hate crime.
But he does red out the camera with the spray paint. As he's doing that, you can't quite see what the guys in the background are doing. You can only imply it. Well, you can see what White Boy Bob's doing. You just can't see him hitting anything.
And you can see his face. He is a man who is now haunted. He's never killed anybody before.
Oh, you mean Glenn?
He's like traumatized. Yeah, Glenn is. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, the whole thing at the end, he's running away, and then Karen sees him and confronts him in the car. So you've got this whole thing where he's still being funny, but he also feels so bad for this guy. But almost everybody else in this movie is a criminal or something bad about them. I guess maybe Maurice is on parole because he's out of jail and he doesn't seem to have to worry about the cops picking him up. But of course, Jack broke out of prison following Chino and those other guys. Guys die in that. That's another thing about this movie. It's very funny a lot of the time, but the guard tower cops mow down at least two of the people that got out of that hole. It's not Chino and his buddy. They're the first two.
No, it is Chino's buddy.
Well, Chino himself doesn't die.
Chino's boyfriend dies.
But Chino lives. I think two other guys get shot and killed too. But then the smart thing is Jack's wearing the cop's outfit. He picked a fat guy smartly so he can wear the guy's clothes over his own clothes, but then act like he's a prison guard. Hey, they got out that way. Pretty clever on his part. And just having Buddy wait outside. Probably would never have happened even in 1998. Certainly wouldn't happen now, I wouldn't think, to get out of jail that easily. But they're also in the middle of nowhere. You need to have a ride waiting for you, or you're not going to survive.
It is so hard to get out of prison and then to make it outside of prison that I just really don't believe that very many people can do it ever.
Well, one of the things about this movie that we like and we buy it, but it's also one of those things, if you didn't execute it well, everyone will be saying, maybe they do, even if they like the movie. I'm about to do it right now. He really skirts danger almost stupidly, which Buddy does call him on, by not leaving fucking town because he just wants to see Karen one more time, not even in person, just physically see her. Now can we go to Detroit? Get the fuck out of there. You're risking getting caught. And then he probably, I think he respects her, I don't even know much about her. She's a good cop on top of everything else, but even if she's not, she can tell other people who are. Although one of the other things she does wrong is that when he sees her sitting in the lobby, that wave, again, you could play that scene 100 different ways, and the way Clooney plays that stunned high wave just as the door's about to close on him.
That is one of my favorite moments of the movie.
And she should rat him out, but doesn't do it. So even though I buy it.
And the phone call, too. There's all these little moments.
Well, and he calls her when she's sitting there with her FBI boyfriend who's leading the task force to find him.
And she says to Foley, oh, listen, my dad's right here and my FBI boyfriend is right here. I could just turn you in right now. What's stopping me? But we know that she's not going to because she's enjoying it too much.
Also, the movie still has to happen.
I love it so much.
So Ripley is set up as a Michael Milken, apparently. That's what he's based on. inside trader type person, some not criminal in the murder sense or robbing a bank sense. Well, he did rob a bank probably in some ways in a metaphorical way, but not the way that Jack did it. He did it legally, but not really legally. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Bernie Madoff type of person. Goes to jail for a while, meets all these terrible people, basically promises Jack a job on the outside. He probably was thinking even then, maybe not security guard, but he wasn't going to be some executive, but that's what Jack walks in thinking it's going to be, is some kind of important job. You got to prove to me you can change. Brooks plays an interesting character in this because, of course, he's known for his comedies, but he can be fucking hard and mean, and he is in this movie. Even when he says about Midge, I'm not leaving without Midge, I love her. There's an edge to that. I believe him that he actually loves her, but he's not whining, and he's also not in any way funny, even though Albert Brooks could be so funny. Broadcast News is probably the best thing Albert Brooks ever did, partly because he was so funny and so likable, but also so fucking mean when he wanted to be to Holly Hunter.
Yeah.
And then also so mad at Tom all the time, William Hurt's character. But in this movie, at the end, with the diamonds, like I said earlier, he puts his wigs in the safe, but his diamonds are in the fish tank because they're not supposed to be noticeable. They wouldn't be noticeable to you or I, but Jack figures it out, and then, luckily enough, Buddy gets away with the diamonds. So Buddy's the only person that we care about from this movie. They really gets away clean. Obviously, Glenn lives, but he's haunted, and he ran away from that car with nothing. Not even his coat. That's still in the boxing club.
Yeah.
So Buddy gets away with all the diamonds. Presumably, he's going to be okay.
He's on a beach in Mexico building a boat, waiting for
I guess so,
Jack
yeah.
to join him.
Yeah. But he's got Ripley's diamonds, and Ripley's got a house that he's got to clean up with all these dead bodies and bullet holes and everything in it now, too. But he also maybe can be with Midge, even though she's actually married to somebody else. Anyway, so Brooks' character isn't very funny in this, but he's a pretty big name to have a fairly small role. We've never covered Drive, but he is such an asshole in that movie, too. So even though we've covered him in Taxi Driver, where he's got a bit of an edge, too, for that matter, and Lost in America, where he's very funny, with some edge sometimes, and I mentioned Broadcast News, this is an unusual choice, and I didn't recognize him the first time I saw the movie until he has the wig on, I guess, or maybe it's just his natural hair they styled. But when he's out of jail and he's arguing with Jack about the job Jack doesn't want, then I think I recognized Brooks. I didn't recognize Nancy Allen. She's the bad girl in Carrie, Travolta's girlfriend. She's in RoboCop. I watched that again a few days ago as well. But those two people, I didn't recognize them at all when I saw this movie the first time. Maybe Brooks later on, but not when he was bald.
I don't love him in dramatic roles.
Really? I think he played, especially Drive. He's scary in Drive.
Yes, I agree. I haven't seen Drive in a while. And he's convincing. I just like him so much better in comedies. He's such a gifted comic actor.
A round stick. Things with toast. You love Lost in America. I had to bring that up. And I eat shit.
One of the greatest endings of any comedy of all time.
Brad! All right, so the cast then, we've talked about them. Let's break down some of their credits. Clooney, we've covered him plenty of times now. Three Kings, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, so funny in that. The Descendants, Gravity with Sandra Bullock. And of course he produced Argo. We covered that last year. Most of those movies actually we've covered fairly recently, so I guess we had never covered Clooney until we had done... Well, Gravity was a Now Playing Project podcast in 2014, probably late 2013 actually. But apart from that little tiny snippet we did there, and he's barely in that, the first podcast we ever did about him was probably Three Kings. J-Lo we've never covered before, but has she ever been better than this? Rames had talked about him already. Steve Zahn, That Thing You Do. Don't sleep on that movie. I saw it again not long ago, and I could probably quote it to you right now. Funny movie in general. Hanks is great in his own movie, but Steve Zahn is just hysterical in that film and so cute and lovable.
Do you remember that I've never seen it?
Oh, you haven't?
No, it's so funny. You talk about it all the time.
It's on Disney Plus. We have the DVD or Blu-ray, and that is a song you hear so many times in that movie, and I never get sick of it. I've heard that song probably hundreds of times now, and he is a guitarist in that band. Talked about Cheadle and Guzman already. They were both in Boogie Nights and in Traffic, together as partners in Traffic. Cheadle worked with Clooney, of course, with the Ocean's movies, and now he's in the MCU as Rhodey. Catherine Keener is Adele, pretty small role in this, but Being John Malkovich, Adaptation, and Get Out, we've covered all of those in the past with her in them. And we talked about Farina, Keaton, Sam Jackson, Isaiah Washington, Viola Davis, we covered not long ago in Far From Heaven, and Nancy Allen. Of course, Brooks as well. So Soderbergh, Traffic and Contagion, produced Pleasantville. I feel like he could have really fit in the 40s as an old pro. Like a Michael Curtiz, who worked on so many films and so many different kinds of films. The same year as Casablanca, Curtiz does Yankee Doodle Dandy. So you got a musical with a guy who's not known for musicals and Jimmy Cagney, but then what became the most famous love story of all time in Casablanca by the same guy in the same year, both AFI movies, so we covered them a long time ago. I think Soderbergh could have fit back in that era, even though he doesn't seem like he wanted to be conventional, which those movies generally were.
I'm going to disagree just because I feel like he has that 90s indie spirit. It's in his heart, even if he ultimately had to go mainstream. The way that he wants to do every job on the set. And
that's true.
Even after he's been successful, he still has to branch out and do whatever suits his fancy. He makes movies that I'm sure the studio would rather not fund. That indie spirit would never fit in those strict studio years.
Those are all good points, and I won't disagree with you, but I will just add this one more bit. I think you could have fit into that era anyway. Even with those limitations, not that he's the best director of all time, but you look at the resume, so much of it is different. I didn't love Magic Mike, but that's a pretty popular movie with people. They're making another sequel to that fucking thing, and it was a big hit at the time. I didn't hate it, I just didn't love it. And sometimes you get people like McConaughey in that at the time. Oh my God, McConaughey, we forgot the guy can actually act. J-Lo, well, she was still so new. Clooney, though, he can't be a movie star. No one knew that until he does this movie. And then most of the movies Clooney made that were really reputable, for a while at least, were with Soderbergh.
This movie makes the case for casting directors being like a category in the Oscars, because the casting of this film, Clooney was not a movie star when this movie came out. He credits this movie with making him a proper movie star. Yes, he had played Batman, but it had been considered a huge failure, and people were really questioning whether or not he could make the leap from TV to movies until they saw this. J-Lo, she had been in movies, but this is the movie where I learned who she was. Viola Davis was not a star. Don Cheadle was still on his way up. Steve Zahn, all these people who are stars now. Considered some of the greatest actors of their generation.
Well, that's the funny thing, though. Someone like Cheadle, for example, has never really, I said this earlier, been a true headlining star, but a hell of a good actor. He's been the lead in movies like Hotel Rwanda. Got a nomination for that. Very good movie. But he's not somebody you usually put front row center in some big blockbuster. You could. Maybe it's racism, but that doesn't really happen. Viola Davis has gotten her kudos finally after many years of doing small things in Soderbergh movies a lot of the time. So you say big names, and they are. Zahn's another one, but they're more character stars.
Fair.
Clooney's a bona fide movie star, but it took him a while to get there because he was working in the 80s in TV, but also in some movies like that Killer Tomato sequel or something like that. He made plenty of things before he even did Batman, failure that it was, or One Fine Day. Then finally this, but deep into his career before he actually got this made, he was, I think, around 40 already, or close to it, when this came out. Scott Frank wrote it, though. Also wrote Get Shorty, which I mentioned. I forgot he wrote that, too. Love Get Shorty. Danny DeVito's production company produced this movie, so he's a producer. Michael Schamberg, Stacey Scher. They all produced Aaron Brockovich, and they were there at the Oscars a couple years later when Soderbergh was there for that movie as well, but Soderbergh won for Traffic. And they were executives on Pulp Fiction. Another Pulp Fiction connection.
He was considering casting himself as Ripley.
Good casting, all right.
Yeah, I would be curious to see that.
The movie's 185-1. We watched it on Stars, although we do own the DVD, because how could we not? Cinematographer, one of the last times Soderbergh didn't shoot his own film, was Elliot Davis. He had shot Soderbergh's 90s movies, but then Soderbergh started doing his own. I think Traffic was, if not the first one of. And operating as well. So he's both lighting the thing and operating it as Peter Andrews.
And I would say that Traffic, it made some choices that were pretty bold and I think on trend in the 90s, but we talked about this when we covered it. It's a little much.
But one of the smart things about
one
of the smart things about Traffic is one of the things you see in this movie though too, that does keep you oriented where you are, and that is filtering. Because when they're in Detroit, it's winter, it's cold, and obviously in Florida, it's warm and it's a whole different situation. Yeah. So you know where you are. This movie's confusing sometimes, and it does take multiple viewings to really get at all where you are, but that does help you from the jump. When they're in Detroit, it's bluish and it's cold. Yeah. And it looks cold. It feels cold.
Yeah, and he does that in Traffic, but to an extreme that is hard on the eyes.
But it really did keep you oriented where you were in that film. We talked about Andy Coates, of course, cutting it. I like the music a lot. Really cool score by David Holmes. He also did The Ocean's Threesome and other Soderbergh films.
I do love the score for this film. It's so sexy. It's just perfectly appropriate. They really never overuse it. They also integrate pop songs here and there, like It's Your Thing. It just matches the movie perfectly, that tone.
Great music, yeah. What happens next? Well, Jack breaks out of prison with Hajira, but people figured out Karen helped make this happen, so she's out of a job and maybe going to jail herself. Also, obviously, Hajira isn't good at staying out of prison, so he and Jack get caught pretty quickly.
And this Jack's going to get caught again.
Maybe Jack will kill himself rather than go down. That's a sad scene, too, when he pulls down his mask and empties his gun and is effectively inviting her to shoot him because he's not going to go to jail, in his opinion. And he doesn't want her to have to shoot him when he's looking at her or when she knows it's him. She knows it's him, but if she knows it's him, it's almost a sacrifice similar to A Star is Born in a way. It's a somewhat mercy killing of yourself, except you're asking your lover to shoot you and kill you. But she won't do it. She shoots him in the leg instead. Okay, then last thoughts on one of your favorites in your second movie in the month of Bev, 2023, Out of Sight.
I couldn't be more delighted to discover that this movie is aging like wine. Unlike a lot of movies that followed Pulp Fiction and tried to copy that style. Right. I still love it 25 years later, and it feels ageless.
When a year of quirky and unusual films, because Saving Private Ryan was not that obviously not that unusual, and Shakespeare in Love maybe a little bit. I like them both, by the way, not saying they're not great, but Pleasantville, Truman Show, Big Lebowski, all different and unusual in one way or another, and 3 of my favorites. But this was a great pleasure of that year, too. For it to even be in the conversation with those says a lot. I like those more, but I like this close to as much. Supporting cast nails it. Certainly the stars do. The story and the editing remain awesome. And Soderbergh might have hit his peak 25 years ago. Not to say that The Informant wasn't really good. The Ocean's movies weren't good. We've liked other things he's done, but his best work may have come here. I like Traffic more than you. I don't know if that's his best film, but I just like it more than you.
I like Traffic a lot. I like Aaron Brockovich a lot.
That one I don't like as much. But what a run that was, because you don't like The Limey, but I think that's a strong film as well.
Yeah, I'm an outlier in that. I don't like that movie.
And then Clooney and Soderbergh make Solaris, which I thought was pretty good. Okay, before we wrap here, some notes on this channel. This episode will go up on YouTube either very soon, or maybe it will already be up. And we want to shoot videos of these things, at least some of the time. One of the reasons to do that is to fix errors. We said, oh, yeah, you got that wrong. Also, I posted a solo podcast just a few days ago when I prattled on about Sherlock Jr., but I'm right back at it in 4 days. That will be a timely episode. Martin Luther King Day is on January 16th. So on Friday the 13th, no, nothing like that. Tune in as I talk into the microphone on my own about Stanley Kramer's 1958 race relations movie, The Defiant Ones. And then I'll be every other week, but not the same week as Chris and I post for Scoring at the Movies. That's why I'm doing consecutive weeks, and it changes, so you know what I'm saying. I think you get the gist, and so does the audience. But as for the 2 of us doing the Talkie Talk, next week we'll be right smack in the middle of the 8th annual month of Ev, the 31 days where she programs the schedule. So when Have You Ever Seen hits the airwaves on the 16th, we'll be talking about Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy in the 3rd of Richard Linklater's Before series. And they didn't do a 4th one last year like they probably should have.
They didn't.
Before Midnight. The coming attractions trivia for Before Midnight. This is a softball. What's Celine's last line in Before Midnight?
So for the answer to that question, please check out next week's podcast about Before Midnight. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen. And if you were already following the Top 100 project, nothing will change except our logo.
And our name.
And our name, yes. Including access to our archive of hundreds of episodes that are still available for you for free. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. Or you can reach us by email, haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
No more timeouts. We have to end this podcast.
And cut.
It's your thing. Hit the stop button.